Previously on Punk Jazz. For word of mouth, his first album under the new deal with Warner Brothers, Jaco Pastorius, the bad boy of punk jazz, would finally be out on his own. No longer would his sensibility be filtered through a producer like Bobby Colomby, a songwriter like Joni Mitchell, or a bandleader like Joe Zawinul. Even the sleeve photo was an indicator. Jaco seated behind a piano with a pencil clamped between his teeth. This time, the spotlight was not on Jaco, the bass phenomenon, but on Pastorius, the composer.
Right here, see that table there? I've seen him sit there for 24 solid hours and never move. I'd go down to Presser's, the big music place, and pick up all these things on Stravinsky and everything, Shostakovich, and he would just sit and read and see how they did everything, man.
Composer Mike Gibbs.
He wanted me around to orchestrate should he need it, but he ended up doing it himself. But he'd occasionally ask me, the range of an alto flute, little things like that. And it was as if he wanted me there in case. We then went to LA for 4 days. We stayed at Peter Erskine's house, and then we were recording.
It became 3 months. I eventually had to kick him out because it was getting a little too tumultuous. He would come back 2:30 in the morning and then turn on my stereo, and all of a sudden really loud in the house. And I was worried about my neighbors and my girlfriends looking at me like, this has got to stop. But we knew we were in the midst of something wonderful. At one point, I remember he was setting off firecrackers in the echo chamber, and recording that. So there's a lot of far out sounds on there.
On Jaco's first solo album, he had drawn on Charlie Parker, the ultimate improviser. This time, the non-originals were by two of his favourite composers, Johann Sebastian Bach and Paul McCartney.
The first Warner Brothers album comes out, and I don't think it was what they expected. They expended a lot of money. They gave him a huge release.
Jaco's brother Rory.
And the first song on side one is Crisis, which is just this bass riff forever.
He insisted on starting the album with it, and Warner's, they finally kind of threw up their hands in despair. They said, if you start the record with the song, there's nothing we can do to help sell it, and the record's going to die.
Warner Brothers had signed Jaco for 2 albums, and the label had high hopes that with word of mouth out of his system, Jaco would bring in what they really wanted from him, a crossover smash to rival Heavy Weather.
So the second album, his idea is it's going to be a steel drum album, and he's not even going to play on it because he's the producer. It's going to be a Tellos album. And they were going to do Holiday for Strings. In fact, it was called Holiday for Pans, you know. But on steel drums.
Warner Brothers didn't want to know anything about Holiday for Pans. Othello Molyneux.
I remember sitting with him crying on the phone to the record company executives, you know, saying, all I want is my music out, I don't care what you do. I mean, I'm talking about tears streaming down his face, saying, all I want to do is people to hear my music.
Jaco saw the face of the front office, you know, in America.
Wayne Shorter.
The true face of corporate money-making appeared in Jaco's life. Unless they have a guaranteed something that's going to sell and all that, you have to be ready to go down with the ship.
While Jaco argued and pleaded with Warner Brothers over Holiday for Pans, word of mouth was going gold in Japan. If he wanted people to hear his new music, Japan was therefore the logical place to start. However, at this time, logic wasn't his strong point.
When I was 11, almost 12 years old, I was going to Japan with my dad for the Orex Jazz Festival. So my dad picks me up with his hair shaved off and full Indian garb with like a Mikasuki Indian headband and a white Rolls Royce with an English chauffeur with the outfit and everything, a little hat. I was like, alright, whatever. We were on our way to the airport, but we had to make a stop first. My dad insisted that we get more Indian clothes before the tour.
Saxophonist Randy Emmerich.
We met in California, LA airport, I believe. And when I first saw him, I knew immediately there was something wrong. He was walking around with a bass, no case, with a pair of sunglasses on with one lens missing, talking about how he'd been blind from birth.
It's hard to explain how I felt about my dad's behavior at that point, because he appears to be happy, but on another level inside me, I really don't know what's going on. And he wasn't harmful to me, but it just wasn't the old daddy that I was used to.
At that point, his manager and several of us in the band kind of assigned watches. We had somebody with him at all times, and about all he could do would be suggest doing something that would keep him out of trouble rather than do something that's really bizarre. I mean, he's really capable of doing almost anything.
Saxophonist Alex Foster.
Yeah, it was pretty bizarre, except when we were on the bandstand. I mean, there were times when we didn't even think Jaco would make it to the bandstand. And as soon as we started playing, he would leap onto the stage. As crazy as it was like, for me, a very magical quality about how things actually would always come together no matter what. No matter how many days he had been missing, when it came time to hit, he was always there.
The thing is, he could switch back. That's the nature of the illness, and that's, I think, why I went untreated for so long, because he could be totally out of control, like he was on a Japan tour. And then I remember I didn't see him for a little bit, and the next time I saw him, it was Daddy again. Normal stuff.
Jaco fulfilled the second half of his commitment to Warner Brothers with a smoking Japanese double live album called Twins. The title celebrated the impending progeny of his second marriage, though for US and European release he filleted it down to the single album Invitation. Back in the USA, he continued to perform, leading a smaller band also called Word of Mouth. But due to Jaco's increasingly erratic behaviour, that band splintered before it could record. Percussionist Don Elias.
My attitude at that time when he started to get sick, was like, okay, man, something is happening to you, but boy, when you get on stage, you're going to kick ass anyway, and then we're going to deal with this mental thing afterwards, but at least we knew that you can do this. Of course, the problems came, later on when he wasn't able to do that. That's when we knew that there was real serious trouble.
The progression in the way people dealt with him here was, okay, let's try to keep him out of trouble, to what are we going to do, because we can't keep him from getting into trouble, to like, you better stay away from him or there's going to be trouble. And then it got to the point where even his best friends were like, you had to keep a distance. He was completely off the scale.
When he would get drunk, he would provoke people deliberately to hit him, which was really strange. I mean, and he would provoke him to hit him, but he would never defend himself. It wasn't really that much of a surprise that what eventually happened to him.
Very late in his life, he told me once, all my life, I wanted to be known as the greatest bass player, okay? So now all these polls tell me, I win these polls, I'm the greatest bass player and all this. And now so what? It doesn't matter.
Then, he'd call sometimes in the middle of the night, around 3 or 4 in the morning, from some far-off place. And he would call Joe and myself and say, I love you guys. And that's it. And then hang up. There were so many missiles and projectiles flying through in his path. He didn't get the airspace to look into himself past what he thought he saw and what he thought he heard in his head.
By the time the twins were born, Jaco's second marriage was all but over. His manic depression was now in full effect, and his new wife, Ingrid, was understandably unable to deal with him. Jaco relocated to Manhattan, but was soon evicted from his apartment. 2 years after that Japanese tour, he was still making music, but he ended up sleeping rough in Washington Square Park. Journalist Bill Milkowski was a friend of Jaco's during his New York years.
Well, Jaco actually lived for a period of time on Jones Street, which is only a couple blocks from here. And he actually turned his apartment into a swimming pool. He stuffed up all the cracks and filled up the room with water and invited a group of Vietnam vets over to go swimming one night. And that was it. The landlord kicked him out. He had no place to go, and he ended up living literally on this court, sleeping on the court and sleeping on the park benches in Washington Square Park. He lost his bass there a couple times. He would fall asleep with his bass propped up against the park bench and wake up and it would be gone. Sometimes he would find it in pawn shops, sometimes not, and sometimes he would show up for gigs with no instrument, and it was a very bohemian and dark period for him.
See some different music. It's time, man. We got to get, us musicians got to get to work. This is bullshit.
Jaco's brother, Gregory.
Things had gotten crazy, and I think that the frustration of knowing what you're capable of and not being able to do it, for whatever reason, if it's a record label that wants you to do something else, if it's you need a certain kind of quiet in a room with a piano in it and you don't have access to that, it's like being in a room someplace that you don't want to be in. You feel like you should be somewhere else doing something else. I think that's how Jaco felt all the time in the last years. Where's this place where I can go and get back to the original challenge? in that time period, the thing that affected me the most, without a doubt, as far as realizing that something was really wrong, wasn't where he was living on the street, wasn't necessarily who he was hanging out with and all that, but it was his fingernails. Because Jaco always took such care. It was such a part of his sound. If they were a little too long, they scratched the fretboard or whatever, got in the way, and he used to carry a little emery board with him, and he would constantly be working on his nails just so they'd be right, and that devastated me, that they were gone. They were, chewed off, down, like bloody. I mean, I knew at that point that this is so far beyond anything that makes sense.
At the request of Jaco's family, Dr. Ken Alper committed him to psychiatric hospital.
Jaco's brother Gregory and Ingrid, his wife, came to New York. At that time, I was working in the emergency room at Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital, and I was able to commit Jaco involuntarily. That involved persuading the police to bring Jaco from Washington Park, where he was hanging out, to Bellevue, and he stayed there for 7 weeks. In his immediate circle, there were those who were not inclined to see his behavior as illness. There's a certain glamorization of mental illness that, artists are supposed to be crazy, or artists are allowed to be crazy, or that's somehow that Jaco was just displaying the artistic temperament. Nothing could be further than the truth, because Jaco, at the height of his artistry, had internalized a real work ethic set of values and was extremely polite and extremely disciplined and very focused on his family and his kids as he was, becoming the brilliant musician that he was. Basically, the provocative behavior, the motor hyperactivity, it's mania, and people that are manic tend to be aggressive, irritable, or elated, or grandiose, and those things will get you into trouble.
I think he was diagnosed pretty early as a manic depressive, but I don't think none of us knew what that meant. I mean, my mom certainly didn't know what it meant. I mean, if we would have known then what we know now, it possibly could have been quite a different outcome.
Ain't nothing you can do. I mean, I played Carnegie Hall concert by myself, and this is the last time I saw him. And
Joe Zawinul.
He came out of the hospital, and he helped me to get a song. Carnegie Hall is a very difficult song. He was running around in the balcony everywhere around and coming back like a little kid. He said, "Yeah, that sounds good." Bass drum is a little boomy over there, so he helped me a lot and had a super concert, solo concert. That's the last time I saw him. And he called me one time. Yeah, he called me, and he was talking about we gotta get together and do that. And he was already living on the streets then. And he was in bad shape because he went to clubs, stole money from the tables, that's bad news, you know what I'm saying?
He called me the night before he was creamed. Hey, Dad! He said, just signed with Columbia Records, man. He said, remember that tune you wrote years ago? You wanted to sing with just you and a bass. He said, you remember it. Ba 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 ba. So I want to do it with you, man. I want to do it. We got to get together. I want to do that tune with you. Next day I'm out at what's the name, and I get a call from Gregory. Dad. Yep. I expected it sooner or later. He was. I just knew he was going to self-destruct. I knew it. It was inevitable.
After a second and more productive stay in Bellevue, Jaco had migrated back to Florida to try, once again, to get himself back together. But he had stopped taking his medication, plus he'd fallen off the wagon big time. Attempting to gain admittance to a club from which he had previously been barred, he was beaten into a coma by an overzealous bouncer. 9 days later, he died in hospital without regaining consciousness, a few weeks before what would have been his 36th birthday.
I really liked Jaco. I really liked hanging out with him in the early days because he knew what he wanted and he knew how to get there. He had kind of an impish personality, like, yeah, I got the answers and stuff like that, but he backed it up in every possible way. And we had a wonderful time.
Yeah, on the outside, he was a happy-go-lucky, sort of happy-go-lucky Sagittarian. He always said, I'm a Sagittarian, man. You know, it's me and Frank Sinatra, Sagittarian. And but I always felt that inside he was unsettled. You know, no landing place. It's almost like he was looking for an airfield to land. We were pallbearers. We carried his coffin out of the church. When we got to the cemetery, his father knocked on his coffin, and he spoke to the lady. He said, "It ain't over yet."
Jaco Pastorius, 1951 to 1987, the greatest bass player in the world.